sit up straight just for a moment and draw yourself in. Join your palms. Take a moment to place yourself in this parampara. And relax the ear and the hearing as if the ear canal took its usual route, which is from the outer ear, more or less horizontally in. But after that ear releases in past the eardrum, middle ear, inner ear, let that hearing release downward, as if the ear itself were releasing inward and downward. So the hearing descends to the region of the heart. Bow your head to your heart. Release your hands. Raise your head. Open your eyes. Excuse me. And stretch your legs. I think it was a mistake to read the allergy reports. The tree pollen. Stretch your legs. Okay, so the first thing is sitting up straight. Let us review. I quote from Birju Metta. The instruction is trying to show, sorry, I'll tuck my shirt in, show the spine here from its base. So the first thing, this base, the spine, sacrum, which connects to the lumbar spine right at its top. You want to lean forward, take support with your fingers, lean forward and move that joint. Now, think about this. Here's Birju. He says there is one action, one state of being of a joint, and that is expanded, open. There is no healthy condition of a joint that in compaction. So you've got this chain of bones, each one of which, the space between each one of which has to be spacious. So you can't have your vertebrae colliding with each other to get away from the one on the other side. Sit cross-legged, beg pardon, Karen. And if you need to, if there's something with the knee and the hip happening, sit higher, get bricks to support the hands. Open that lumbar spine by, after you tilt this, keep the sacrum fixed, grounded, and lengthen the fifth lumbar vertebra away. Relatively speaking, L5 is stable and L4 opens. Relatively speaking, L4 is stable, L3 opens. So keep the one close to the floor, stable. And what you get is your internal direction is grounding and internal direction is lifting. So you come all the way up through those vertebrae. And if you do this, the chest, the abdomen starts lengthening, opening. So now I'm pushing on my knees because I need the height. And don't be tempted to just push with your hands and traction yourself. You have to actively ground and actively lift each vertebra. Take your top shoulder back. So you will feel like you're in a back bend with this, especially Karen, with the lumbar extension, that top sacrum should continue to tilt in. So this lower pelvis abdomen opens. Work very hard. That space in the lowest lumbar 1 or 2 or 3 vertebra is very hard to keep. Ground, lift each joint. Okay. Take your arms up, interlock your fingers, turn your palms up. Do not drop your sacrum flat. You have to keep that sense of space, ground that hip socket, sacrum. Go up, stretch your elbows, go up. Go up. Release, come out. Very scratchy. Change the crossing of the legs. Maybe not so slowly, but just as carefully. Hopefully you made some progress by working and keeping. Tilt the pelvis so you're pretty much on the front of your butt bones. There's a clear tilt. And lift that fifth, take support. Lift that fifth lumbar away from the, even though the sacrum is tilted, it still grounds. The sacrum buttock muscles are still lengthening away from whatever's attached to that vertebra underneath it, lengthens away from it. and the vertebra lifts, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It's easy if you push hard with your hands to keep the lift. You have to keep the equal grounding, keep the space in the joint from both sides. Come upright, shoulders back, chest expanded, because these thoracic vertebrae their spaces are expanded. It's the second interlock of the fingers. Turn your palms, stretch your arms, stretch your arms. Each joint in this shoulder structure also has to spread. It is quite useful to start from the armpit. So the armpit chest stays stable and the armpit arm reaches. The hips stay grounded. Spine stays lifted. Release, come out. Now, from all that extension, stretch your legs again, and then I think we should take Adho Mukha Svanasana. Such a natural pose. So, of course, you can start in Adho Mukha Virasana and do it with the same sensitivity to lengthening, putting some space as best you can feel it. Including the armpit, including the elbow, wrists, fingers. Then come up, Adho Mukha Svanasana. First be on the knees. Now think here, the extension of the arm comes from the spine. So you have to move that arm, including the shoulder joint, away from the spine. Then you come up, spreading the armpit and stretching the arm from the neck and spine. Each joint, shoulder joint, neck, vertebra, thoracic, right in that pinchy place everybody gets at the top shoulders when things get tired. Maybe even the shoulder socket. That's the joint collapsing. That's the unhealthy state. So work with great focus. The most vulnerable joint for most of us is in that shoulder girdle, but it could be the shoulder socket or somewhere close to the neck, one of those. Come out. Watch for a second. So again, focusing on the extension of this arm. Imagine, well, I'm going to shortly go to plank pose, dog pose, plank pose. And what you see is a right angle. And I want to open the armpit chest from the armpit arm. And simultaneously, that spine is stretching out to my arm is stretching from that spine. So I want to keep this extension in plank pose. Okay. Make your arms very close to vertical. If you need direct support under the wrists, you can roll up a sticky mat and put it just on, protect your wrists, okay? Then you, from the different ankle, extend your elbow away from the neck. Think of it that way. And keep your throat open. So whatever your head does is to keep those vertebrae open. Then stretch one leg back, straight, toes down, hips up, and the other. Keep those ribs lifted a bit and internally sliding away from the armpit. Armpit away from, both feet, if possible, chaya. If there's no trouble caused by that. Karen, I think your hips are a bit high. So if possible, Karen Carpenter, can you bring your, hips down? There you go. And make sure that spine is lifted. Okay, so this is really a question of connectedness here. So you can come out whenever you need to. But do you feel when you get tired how the joint just goes like this way instead of staying open? Okay. Get a chair. No, Adho Mukha Svanasana first. Got to get it on the floor. So lifting that spine, come all the way up and spread those armpit chests away from the armpit arm. Maintain that in your awareness. It's going to keep you from sinking the head toward the floor. That would be the lazy tamasic heavy way of working. It will also keep you from being too aggressive, pushing your hands to the floor, pushing your hips back. You can't do this by no effort or only effort. No tamas, no rajas. Those two, here's birshu. Those rajas and tamas are not sustainable. Sattva is sustainable. And that is true of every joint. So follow through with every one of those vertebrae. Follow through with the hip socket, knee, expand the joints. That looks good, Gay. This looks much better than usual, Gay. I like this pose. Good, come out. I hope you liked it too.
Yes.
One of the hallmarks of a good pose is that it makes you happy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's really true on a you might say neurological level, but you can also, it's more surface than that. If a pose is collapsing, it makes you happy to get out of it. Right? We look for happiness where we can, but you can't be content in that pose. So a hallmark of a good pose is that you're happy in it. Okay, get it, chair. Put it near a wall. It's just nice to not be worried about slippage. So we're going to do a careful upward facing dog, plank pose. Maybe not. Yes, plank pose, because a characteristic of upward facing dog is the legs stay straight. And that's like me saying when you're sitting on the floor to keep those hips grounded as you lengthen your spine up. When you're standing, you have to anchor that spine through the legs to the floor. So we take a plank pose, like where you've been. And the arms need to be roughly vertical, pretty darn vertical. If you see my hands, my fingers turn outward. And you can't see it, but my elbows can turn forward. The elbow crease can face forward. This is kind of interesting. Here I'm talking about expansion, but first things first, tuck that arm bone into the right part of the socket. Then move the chest wall away from that socket. Move the armpit to arm away from that socket. Stretch your legs to keep those lumbar vertebrae open. Keep the armpit, seems like the armpit is getting very close, but make that armpit very deep. The top of the armpit stays lifted, and the arm and the chest stretch away from it, and you come into upward facing dog, walking closer, Chaya, so your hips come more under the shoulders, and stretch your legs. Yes, so the weight does not fall backwards into the spine, right? Always you keep space between every bone. Every joint has space. So you focus where you collapse. Marsha, walk in closer to the chair. I think you'll be happier. Yes, the armpit stays tall, but the arm stretches away from the neck and the spine. Armpit stays tall. Chest pit hangs down, arm goes down, shoulder goes down. It's that shoulder blade going down, but the arm pit stays stable and expands. That looks good. Now, come out in a sustainable way. That means preserve that space. Yes. Good. And stand up. How'd it go? Okay. Was it all right? Even Chaya, who has these back things that happen. So I think this is, I did see you fidgeting there a little bit, kind of experimenting. So one thing about this word sustainable that Birju uses is there is a steadiness that is characteristic of sustainability. So that means my hips, knees stay stable in their extension. So I always keep that lower, whatever is the problem vertebra, the lower aspect of it has to go through to the legs. If you stop stretching the legs, you lose the lower aspect of the space in the joint. Does that make sense? That lower aspect requires a follow through to the leg. The upper aspect needs a follow through to the next vertebra. So don't fidget with the legs. I don't mean to use, don't wiggle. That's a vritti. So when in doubt, focus more. If you need to move your feet in closer, pick a moment, move those feet. You might have to back out of the pose a bit and go again. But do it with stable focus. Feet coming closer. Okay. All right. And come out. So the more difficult version of this is Bhujangasana. And right from the beginning, in Bhujangasana, you have to create those spacious joints, hip joints, knee joints, ankle joints, to all joints. There's no exceptions. So when you're coming up, these armpits play a role. You have to just be conscious of them. Most of all, you're conscious of the vertebra space. Keep the legs stretching. And here's a lovely hint. Stretch your legs from the base of the rib cage. Stretch as if the anchor of the leg, this is like stretching your arms from the neck side to the neck. This is that analogy. Get the whole low back from the rib cage connected to those feet. The whole rib cage down has to stay connected to those feet. Go up, go down several times. You're looking for the pose that makes you happy. That spine has to be happy. Stretch your leg straight. Lengthen that leg from the base of the rib cage through the hip, like ribs to knees you stretch. And lengthen up those thoracic vertebrae away from that. Okay, is it remaining? Now you must keep the pubis on the floor. That is the difference, the architectural difference in between Bhujangasana and Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. Yes, so Chaya and others, the bent elbows can be, of course, they are just as useful as, as much part of the pose as straight arms. So being on your forearms as you were is, I've got students for whom that is the pose where they get that spaciousness in the joints. And coming up higher than that is risky in space terms. So, I don't mind being on elbows. All right. Most of you have done this 3 or 4 or 5 times, and that makes me happy. So then take, just to come out of any difficulties there, we're going to take Adho Mukha Svanasana. This time, you're going to set up the arms as we did. Then once you're up, I don't know if your heels be up or down. They doesn't matter. But from the base of the rib cage, you're going to go back to that hip socket and turn and keep going back to the knee. So from the ribs, you're going back all the way to the knee. There's this sense of extension with the hip staying open, as any healthy joint should be. From the ribs, you go back through heels up, heels down, go through every vertebra. And then go through the sacroiliac joints. They too need to have space. Then the hip sockets need space. And the knee. So from the base of the ribs to the knee, keep space everywhere. Do not close off space. Karen, walk your feet back a little bit. Yes. I got to distinguish between the two. I'm just going to say Karen in Paris. Come out. Can you do something that resembles headstand? You may work with support. You may hang from ropes. You may do Prasarita Padottanasana. And in this, whether you're hanging from ropes or in Prasarita Padottanasana, if you're low enough, your hands can be like Shirshasana, what we call Shirshasana 1. But most people do what we call Shirshasana 2, which is just planting those elbow palms on the floor elbow shoulder width.
Hi, partner. I hear you. I'll be there soon.
So once you're in your pose, think with those shoulder joints. From the ribs stretch through the hips to the knee. Karen Carpenter, you can do that with your legs wide apart and feet outside the ropes. Yeah, just keep going. You'll stay there. Don't go super wide, go comfortably wide. If your ropes are centered on that sheet of wood, make sure your heels touch the edges equally. If you're falling through, you need I can show you later, but you can put a belt across the front thigh from strap to strap, and it'll hold you in no matter what your leg position. Extend the legs from the hips to the knees, from the ribs to the knees. One more minute if possible. If not, you come out, rest your head. So these instructions we give: lift your buttocks, bring that middle buttock in, stretch the hamstring to the heel. These are all the bits and details and smaller actions that all should actually be combined into an extension from the ribs to the knees. The completeness of the stretch does bring length to the buttocks, space to the hip sockets, space to the low back. Come out, please. So after you rest your head and neck and shoulders, you need to assemble a couple of blankets. And if you're stiff in the hips, you'll get maybe 3. And if you're less, then less. I think a bolster is an excellent idea. And if there's a lot of stiffness, instead of a bolster, you get a chair. So you've got ways of supporting. This is going to be seated forward bends of one sort or another. So you want to have props suitable for such an undertaking. A strap probably is also a good idea. The way you would use that chair is just, there's a whole bunch of ways you can use that chair. Let's say you're just sitting in Dandasana, spreading your toes and opening each of those joints. You feel like there's I'm going to ask you to keep that hip socket open. This is very difficult to do in Dandasana. If you're struggling to keep that spine lifted, these muscles, this front hip, this part gets very grippy. So how do you make this part, this inner angle of that hip socket, how do you make it open? There is the question. So using a chair, using support of the hands, you get an assist. Lengthen the spine. Okay, so when we start changing, the chair becomes a place to give an assist to that lift, that extension. If it doesn't come naturally, the chair can help put some space back. That's what the chair is good for. If you can't catch your foot, if the floor is not available. Okay, so Dandasana first. Upavishta Konasana. Sit back so the thighs are on that blanket. So you can see some blanket in front of my shorts here. Pants, leggings. Take support with the hands. And if you've raised your hips up high on several blankets, because that's what you need for any kind of comfortable version of this pose, sustainable version, then you may put bricks under your hands or keep your hands on those blankets, but take support. Move your thigh toward the blanket and away from your ribs. You're giving support that keeps those ribs lifted. Stretch out from these back ribs through the hips to the knee, through the knee to the ankle, through the ankle to the foot. Turn right. When you turn right, the right hip will tend to very comfortably close and get lazy. Make your right leg keep its space. Left leg, the leg you're turning away from, sort of naturally reminds you that your position is giving it space. Your job is to even it out. Make sure this buttock and low back are staying even in that hip extension. Now you come forward, the belt might be necessary, not just to to injure, to avoid injury on this side, but do not collapse that right hip. Do not get lazy with the space in the right hip socket. It's the right hip. The left hip is being opened by the pose. The right hip, you have to keep it open. Hold with 2 hands. Lift your trunk away from that leg. Come up. You get that it might be difficult. Sit up straight. Reopen those hips as best you can. Turn left. See what's happening to the left hip, right hip. Keep the interior of the, the structure of the pose changes. These muscles are having to move and adjust. Things are different, but you keep the space inside the joint. Go forward, catch the foot inside the joint. Extend from that center of the joint. Catch with 2 hands if you can. There will be muscle changes. Don't change the joints. Lengthen that spine. One hip might be easier to do this and sustain it than the other. Come up. Now we're going to change the blanket, and some of you will like it and some of you won't. And in which case you turn it back. Take the one you prefer. But the experiment is go to the pointy edge of the blanket so that when you stretch your legs out, that thigh bone side of the hip socket gets a natural space. Does that make sense? Your thigh is no longer pushed up by blankets. It can hang down. So you come forward, gay, and get so your hip socket, the whole thigh side of that hip socket is off the blanket. So you come forward. Get where you feel space opens in the joint center. And turn. Keep it, we, in ordinary instructions, we say keep that outer back left hip grounded, the one you're going away from. Okay. That it remains true. That's part of keeping that joint centered and evenly expansive. This right side, you have to keep your attention pretty close to the same place. Outer top, back, thigh, as you come forward. And, it's very not subtle when you catch your foot, the change in those hip muscles. You keep space in the center of the joint. Catch with 2 hands. The muscles change, don't change the joint. Lengthen all vertebra forward in the spine. You take that forward bend from the ground, not losing space not losing any of the radiant stability of that hip. Come up. When I say radiant stability, it's like a sphere. The expansion is even on all sides, not just the side you're looking at, right? The other side too has space. The top has space. Bottom has space, all sides, like the sun. Sun, even the surface you don't see radiates. Sit up straight. Open the hip sockets. Think of your shoulders also, but this obviously is the sort of key part of this pose. Turn left, stretch your legs out to the feet. The expansion is continuous. Up, down, toward the center, away from the center, to whatever side. I turn to my right, which looks like your left. Go forward, keep space. Radiant joints. Every joint. Here's Birshu again. It predates Birju, but it says, if you do one joint properly, that correctness spreads to other joints. Other joints automatically learn. Come up. Okay. That's both sides, right? Okay. So, Baddha Konasana, bound ankle. You choose, do you want that straight-sided blanket or do you like the pointy corner blanket? Sit high enough that and Baddha Konasana is not so easy here to keep those lumbar vertebrae spacious. The tendency is, I'm just going to illustrate what you're feeling, but the tendency is for this to sort of get in position. It pushes the pelvis back. And you've got to hold on to your feet to get that sacrum to come upright. And therein lies some of the problems, because it might help one thing. I mean, it sort of depends on how you pull your feet, right? So don't collapse the hip joint, the knee joint, the ankle joint in your effort to get the low back some support. This is why we take the hands behind at first. Go ahead, shift your hands behind. And you can feel right away the pressure comes off the leg joints. So some of you, because this is how it's taught, it's not your fault yet. If you really tuck the feet in, because that's the way the pose should be. If that closes the joint and you cannot put space back in that joint, it doesn't matter if it's painful, not painful. I'm talking about the direction of energy, the prana. Is it going this way or is it going away from the joint? If painful or not, when it gets in trouble, it tells you cannot collapse the joint. Open it out. Put your feet away from you to keep your knee joints open. It is a big open hip where the heel can come into the pelvis. I'm not saying you don't have open hips. You might, but I'm giving you the new definition, right? Is those joints have to have expansiveness in all directions, radiant joints. So if you're going to pull on your feet, you have to be able to keep radiating. So that shin is actively extending away from the knee joint. Turn toward the right. This is now much more like a twist. So observe those vertebrae and keep space right at the center as you rotate. Come out. Keep space in each joint. If you lose the space, that's when it gets creaky coming out. Fix your hips if things got twisted in the base of this pose and change sides. So one thing you can do if you don't twist far is hold your shin and pull it toward the foot, like you're lengthening that shin in the right direction. And if you turn well enough, you can keep the shoulder open as you cross that hand over, but don't collapse the shoulder out of ambition. Don't sink in the pose. Everywhere you feel a collapse, there probably is one. Can you put space back in those joints and come out? If you will go forward in this pose, you cannot collapse the knee joint. That's what most people do when they come forward, especially if you're on any kind of height. That raises the hips, and as you come forward, the weight more easily goes to the knee. If you're going to try going forward, stiffen the hips. You take Upavishta Konasana, straight legs. Everybody, we should do this one first. Sorry, so I change. Everybody take Upavishta Konasana. And I'll go to the side. You don't have to take a huge angle. You can be comfortable in those joints. So I've already talked about taking height to make it easy in the hip socket, and being on the floor might interfere with that. However, keep the actions going. Extend the leg from the rib cage down to the hip and out to the knee. It's like dog pose. This interior fold has to be spacious and deep all the way to the joint. So it's not just a superficial spaciousness that you are sort of sucking up with your breath or muscles. It is much deeper inside that joint. So you take a chair, a bolster, or nothing, you take yourself down. Rest your head on whatever is suitable, or your sternum. Sometimes resting your chest is just delightful. Lets that spine and breath really breathe. So whatever you take in forward bend, do it keeping that joint centered and as radiant. radiantly expansive. And the hallmark of that stability and expansion, which seems contradictory, but if you get it right, both are absolutely true. The hallmark of that is that it is sustainable, is that the breath is quiet, the breath becomes more pervasive. So come up slowly. Mm-hmm. Now, you all have some sort of bolster. That is good. You can have that bolster and either a second bolster or just a pile of blankets. And it's nice to fold them long and narrowish so they are wide like bolsters. So I've got 3, and that's about all you need, something that gets you close to the height of the bolster. So I'm going to take a strap, sit on the bolster, take a strap to my Baddha Konasana, goes around my head. So it goes over my shoulders, down around the back of my hips, and it goes over my calves and thighs and under my feet. And I tighten that strap up, not so it jams the joints. Hark back to today's lesson. Make sure this belt comes sort of midway around the sacrum. So watch, if the belt is really comfy now, when you lie back, it's going to get tighter because your trunk is going to be rolling away. So it's going to get tighter. You should anticipate that. And tuck your buttocks, lie back, perfectly fine if the feet come up a little bit. And I'm gonna, do you see how I'm just dragging myself into Setu Bandha? So I wind up on only one bolster. I needed that second one just to have space. Now, I need to loosen my strap and I make sure that both sides, the tension on both sides is equal before I let my feet back down. There should be this sense that this whole surface can open. I'm going to come out now and do some watching. If that's, yes. So those top shoulders don't have to, be heavy on the floor, but they should just be very close and dropping and releasing. So that shoulder socket again, that joint there is deep. Now, the same thing is true of the spine. That low back has to be at rest on that bolster and long. The feet can be as far away as necessary. The distance of the feet from the pelvis can influence not just the hips and knees, but the low back. What I'm looking for is a sense that each vertebra space, that's the spine, each vertebra space is present and has a chance to radiate. And if things go well, you start feeling the extension of the organic body. Those cells open. The skin and muscle on either side of the spine relax, surrender. If this Baddha Konasana is very difficult, some of you are moving and adjusting still. If it is quite difficult for you, you can just put that strap around your thighs and stretch your legs to Setu Bandha, straight legs. We only have a few minutes left anyhow, so do be comfortable. Push those blankets out so they stay under your feet unless you are totally happy. No matter what position you're in, connect the extension of the legs to the ribs. Now, slowly, please come out. So one thing at a time. Help those knees out if they're strapped together. If you can slip one foot out and then the other, that is nice. And you slowly make your way out to a long spine on the floor. And be very observant of the before shape and the after shape, right? The elevated chest wall pose and this long horizontal. Did you acquire any more radiance? All right. Everybody, you may stay put. I encourage you to adjust yourself according to those joints. And stay put for a few minutes. Even though I am going to sign off and go to my next appointment. So I join my palms and say namaskar to you all.